feature presentation.
Welcome back to another Untitled movie review. I am one of your hosts, Matt Rohrbeck, alongside, he's allergic to tomatoes, but he is Tomato Meter approved, Eric Marchin.
That's high praise.
That's high praise. Okay, I got a nice Nick Cage pillow. If you're not watching the video version, you're missing out on a wonderful Nicolas Cage pillow that my wonderful fiance Nevis got me, and then immediately put in the closet and said, "Here's a gift, and we'll never display this when people are coming over." So it's beautiful. It's beautiful.
It is. It's from Vampire's Kiss, which was in the early stage of Cage doing his kind of indie thing and also proving to both mainstream audiences and cinephiles alike that he was able to kind of balance both, a commercial vision, but also do some really weird performance art within the characters that he was playing. And so it's going to be fun just talking about Nicolas Cage's career, because his filmography is almost this just interesting sort of story or narrative in itself, in terms of the highs and lows, and sort of it feels like he's done everything, in terms of his career. And I think that that's the most fascinating part about this movie. Even though the film is enjoyable and has its moments, it's maybe not as introspective or as clever as what you'd expect a Charlie Kaufman-esque meta narrative to be.
Sure, but I don't think
what we were
that.
hoping. I know, but I think that's what we were kind of hoping for originally when we heard about this project. In the same way that, like, the way the log line reads, it's almost like, being John Malkovich or obviously Cage being an adaptation and playing Charlie Kaufman to something to that degree. But it's a little bit lighter than that, and it is kind of both poking fun at this man's career, but it doesn't do it in a condescending kind of way. It's kind of embracing every aspect of the one, the only Nicolas Cage.
And I should say, today we are reviewing Tom Gormican's The Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent, starring one Nicolas Cage and Pedro Pascal. You got Lily Sheen in there.
You got Tiffany Haddish. You got Ike Barinholtz.
Oh, you got an after party reunion.
Yep.
Yeah, Eric, how are you doing otherwise?
I'm okay. I'm ready to rage with some Cage, rage and Cajun. It's one of those things where it's like, again, we're a little late because of some health stuff with me, and also just, it's the time of year. Matt's getting ready for his wedding, so it's been busy, and again, we don't mean to we want to get these out as soon as possible, but at the same time we have to consider, we don't want to just rush something out that's going to be 5 or 10 minutes. If
someone's not feeling well, or if someone's busy with something, or you don't have the energy, or me, I was exhausted this weekend too. So yeah, sorry we're a little late, but Eric and I did see this a couple weeks ago, and I think if you've listened to us for a long time, both Eric and I are big Nicolas Cage fans. Both, like, I think from partly ironic in recent years, but mostly genuine throughout his entire career, because I feel like he is one of those guys that can give a genuinely fantastic performance and is a legitimately great actor. Did some wild VOD stuff over the years that people kind of poked fun at him for.
Gotta pay for that dinosaur skull.
Yeah, which is totally fine. And there was a great profile recently on him where he talked about that. And he's like, I gave it my all in every one of those movies. And, everyone has a reason. And, you could tell he was giving his all. And then he gave a great performance in Pig last year, which both Eric and I absolutely adored and voted for him in Critics' Choice and different things like that. He's just one of those, genuinely eccentric dudes who is one of a kind. And I think the perfect personality for a movie like this. And I know what you're saying with the kind of maybe hoping for something a little bit more introspective and Bateman-esque, but like
Or
I think
even, you know, we've talked and praised and loved the movie. Like even looking at something like Everything Everywhere All at Once, the way that that movie encompasses Michelle Yeoh's
Mhm.
career from, you know, going from Hong Kong cinema to American narratives and back again, and sort of looking at that in a very introspective way that's not even necessarily the focal point, but it is referencing a lot of her career from,
Mhm.
you know, Police Assassins to Crouching Tiger,
Sure.
Hidden Dragon, and everything in between that she's done. And so, like, looking at something like that, like, that's not necessarily, you know, like on the Kaufman scale of being so visceral and convoluted sometimes, where Kaufman can get a little bit too inside his own, you know,
Sure.
mindset. But there's elements of that in Everything Everywhere All at Once that are very playful. And I kind of feel like
Playful is the word that
that's,
I was gonna use here too, where I
and
feel like for your description, because I feel
yeah,
like this is kind of surface levelly when it comes to that kind of stuff. But I think after that first trailer, which I didn't think was super great, going into this, I'm like, you know what? I'm just here for whatever Nicolas Cage is going to give me. And I think he gives you that and more in this. And to kick it off, like I again, I don't think it's a great movie. I think it's a pretty, by the books kind of meta action comedy, and I think it does play with some of the tropes of a Nicolas Cage film, whatever you want to define that as, and kind of puts that into the kind of meta narrative. But I think it's a guy that is at a point in his career where I think he's had many stages of it, where we talked about the adaptation Academy Award nominee. Did he win? He won, didn't
so
he?
he won
No,
for Leaving Las
Las
Vegas
Vegas,
in
and then
1995, and then he was
adaptation he was
nominated
nominated.
for
Yes.
adaptation.
Yeah, my
And
bad.
like, I feel okay, like I almost feel like this review is almost going to be kind of like
Just a Nick Cage history
an
lesson.
appraisal of Nicolas
Yeah,
Cage's career, because Nicolas Cage obviously is a Coppola. And so when he
right.
started his
I
career,
always forget about that.
a lot of the criticism that he got, and he was very aware of, was that it was nepotism to the reason why he was able to be in movies. So he was in a lot of Francis Ford Coppola's films, you know, and Peggy Sue Got Married being kind of like the big role that kind of swung for the fences and not everybody loved. But like even in bit parts in other movies like Fast Times at Ridgemont High, when he was still using his name Nicolas Coppola until he
Yeah.
changed it. And then the movie that kind of gave him a little bit of like indie credit was Valley Girl, which was like this
Mhm.
kind of like rom-com, but also kind of a little bit eccentric and weird. If it was released today, it would be an A24 movie, like
Sure.
something like that. And that kind of was like, is like, okay, like there's something there. This guy has something. And then he went too far left field with Peggy Sue Got Married, and that kind of turned a lot of people off. And then what kind of brought him back again was Moonstruck. And Moonstruck was the movie that everybody was like, okay, this guy is actually like a legitimate leading man and can do his own thing. And the kind of magical realism and whimsy of that story works well with kind of his eccentricities and what
Yeah.
have you. And he continued to kind of do that in the early 90s, where you see movies that are kind of, again, a combination of smaller art house films. I mentioned Vampire's Kiss. That is a really weird movie to define, which is kind of
Yeah.
almost in like the League of Martin, where this guy thinks he's a vampire and he, you know, is
I'm a
transforming. And then
vampire.
there's a bunch of like these small VOD movies that were also released at that time as well. There's one with Judge Reinhold that is just uh out there. I believe it's called I've only ever seen it once, Zanderley. And it's like this a weird erotic thriller, and then he references that in one of his more recent VOD movies. And when I mean more recent, in the last 10 years or so.
Sure.
And then there was a part of him that was doing, he started kind of like becoming an art house actor again, and then he started doing movies like Red Rock West, and then Leaving Las Vegas with Mike Figgs and Elizabeth Shue. He got an Oscar nomination, and then he won the Oscar. And even in that acceptance speech, when he goes up, he says, you know, this is going to sound corny, but I love acting. Like this is something I just love doing. And after that, his career is even more fascinating, because then
Yeah.
he becomes an action star. You know,
Yeah.
he stars in Con Air and, you know,
Face Off and
Face Off, and becomes like literally the face of late 90s action, even with, the remake of Gone in 60 Seconds
Yep.
and the
National
Rock
Treasure.
and so like there's that phase of
The
Nick Cage's
Sorcerer's
career.
Apprentice.
And that's where it kind of ends.
Yeah.
Like there's a period there where it's like, okay, he'll still do, like, obviously as well, like the weird stuff at the beginning of his career with like Lynch and Wild at Heart and stuff like that, but around the time of Sorcerer's Apprentice, you start hearing about like, oh, his spending habits and, like his problems with, like, he's been married multiple times, like he has multiple children. And so with that, like, you're hearing, okay, like, what's going on there. And then you slowly but surely see him more on the VOD market with the likes of, John Cusack and Bruce Willis and Adrian Brody, and these guys that kind of once all had fame to a certain degree are now falling back on these movies that are, some people consider some of them to be like money laundering schemes, and then other
I don't
people are
doubt it.
like, yeah. I mean, like, you look at the movies that Nick Cage is in, and there's the odd.
I'm not saying any of those guys have involvement in that, but I
No.
the people
But those
who make
movies
those
themselves,
movies,
especially when they're from like Eastern Europe, and there's
it's
just like,
so weird.
there's like
yeah.
all these like small production companies you've never heard of and never come back again. And so with that part of his career, that's kind of where he became the joke, the ironic kind of
Yeah.
likability of Nick Cage. It's like, oh, are we going to get Nick Cage the serious actor, or are we going to get Nick Cage turned to 11? And so, like, he's also known as the guy that will take any role. Like, he'll show up to an envelope opening, like that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And now, he's in, I believe, that interview that we're talking about, I think it was with either GQ or something like that. He was talking about kind of like paying off his debts and, getting back to a place that he's comfortable to kind of go into, mainstream movies again. And, he's got the Renfield film where he's playing Dracula coming out next year. But it's just interesting that everything kind of building up to this movie is so much focused on, I think, more so than anything else, the last 10-15 years of Nick Cage's career. There are a number of references to movies like Guarding Tess
stuff,
and Captain Crowley's Mandolin and Wild at Heart and
Yeah.
things like that, but it does play up the
personality that we know of the last decade or 20 years or so.
The Cage who will be in anything in order,
the post 2000s Cage.
Yeah, to get a paycheck, but just wanting to continue to work. And I think the best thing about this movie, that the script co-written by the director Tom Gormican and Kevin Eaton really gets through, is that even though acting can be a glamorous kind of ordeal and very opulent in its profession, it's still a job. And Nick Cage is not above taking work, to pay for his, family, his lawyers.
And he talked about that in that interview.
Yeah. And like, that's something that I think the movie does advocate for, and it never makes fun of him for, again, the choices that he's made, because he's been in a lot of VOD crap that is truly awful. But the thing is about those movies, anytime that he's in one of them, and sometimes he's only in it for like,
it's almost worth
5
watching
minutes
because of that.
Well, he makes the movie watchable.
Yes, that's what I
like
mean.
Jiu-Jitsu, he's only in it for about like 5 minutes, and that movie is god awful and almost unwatchable. And when he's in it, it's like, okay, for a second you're like tasting like what could have been. Like, it's almost like eating like something that's undercooked for the most part everywhere else, but then you bite into one piece where it's like, oh, that was good for a second.
Yeah,
that's him.
And I like that he's at that point in his career, like I was saying, that he can just kind of poke fun at himself, and that he can because I do think he was one of those guys who took himself too seriously for a little while, and then eventually, wasn't maybe in on the joke of everyone kind of laughing at him. And then I remember the Andy Samberg thing when he came out with him on SNL. And I'm not saying that's the first, time Nicolas Cage kind of realized, oh, I've become larger than life and people are kind of poking fun at me. But like, I hear in, there's a story in Seth Rogen's book about, when he was going to be in Green Hornet, and like all these things of like these wild Nick Cage stories everyone has about him kind of saying some crazy thing he wants to do for a part, or he was just like unabashedly himself. And then I think as he's gotten later and later in his career, he's kind of realized and gone, you know what, I can take kind of this back and poke fun at myself a little bit. And I just think this movie's a lot of fun. And like, I do think it has some heart to it. And I agree with you that maybe it's not diving super deep into the, into Nicolas Cage's career and his state of mind. It is just really kind of a fun action buddy cop comedy movie that, I
Except there are
think
no
is
cops.
sorry, like a buddy. Yeah.
But
I mean,
I know,
buddy,
I know what you're talking about.
FBI agent, or he's supposed to be, which is a
CIA.
funny CIA,
Yeah.
that I think is actually funny to get Nick Cage to help the CIA in something real. I just think it's a funny premise. And I think him and Pedro Pascal, I like them together. I like Nick Cage kind of playing this, version of himself that doesn't feel, like it's too out there, like it's not Cage up to 11, like I kind of like that, like it plays up certain points of that, but it really does feel weirdly, believable in a way at times for like how he's acting. The plot not so much, but like I think that's when it, the movie just kind of becomes a paint by numbers, like I said, someone needs to help the CIA find the drug lord kind of guy thing, but just dropping Nick Cage into that scenario and him playing himself makes it a lot of fun. And then, there are these groups of fandom like for Nick Cage, whether you on different sections of the internet, there's many film critics in Toronto that fall in that category. And I think he has this cult following almost, that are
Even though he's a
obsessed with
movie
him.
star as well.
I know,
which is
but I mean those
interesting.
people that are like really like love Nick Cage, right? Like it does feel
No, I
like
totally agree
weird,
with you, but like he does have this weird cult following, but he is
is
also
a
a
giant movie star.
star.
No,
Like
he's
it's
someone
a weird
who,
it's a weird place for him to be, but
yes.
it makes perfect
Yeah,
sense.
it is. It's perfect for him, right? Like he's someone where you could go up to anyone, a grandma, and go, "Do you know who Nick Cage is?" And they're gonna kind of
I watch
probably
Guarding
know.
Tests all the
Yeah,
time on TBS.
exactly. And like, but he does have this cult following, and I feel like this is the perfect kind of thing for that, of having a super fan invite him to his birthday to pay him $1 million because he's rich, and hijinks ensue. And I don't think that there's much more to it. And I know some people are getting a little bit more. And I think the movie has a strong emotional core with his daughter and his family, and that like that I think works. I just don't think it gets anything like I don't think it gets to any territory like you were mentioning earlier. Like I just think it's perfectly enjoyable from start to finish. And I think he, again, like you just said in the shitty VOD movies he does, this is much better than that. But Nick Cage is
Even though
just
it
so much
looks
fun.
like one, it
It
does
does,
look like a
yeah.
VOD movie.
Yeah, and that's just a lot of these style of, mid-range, mid-budget kind of action comedies. Like it doesn't look as bad as Moonfall. Oh, I'll talk about that.
Well, also
Um,
shooting in Croatia, right?
oh
Because like a
yeah.
lot of this was shot in Croatia, and like a lot of these VOD movies are usually shot either in Eastern Europe or Latin America or
It's a
wherever
beautiful country, but the digital
there's a
cinematography
tax
doesn't do it. Yeah.
incentive. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's supposed to not it's supposed to actually be Majorca, Spain, and
Mhm.
not Croatia. But Matt, when we were watching the credits, noticed all the names being of Eastern
Yeah.
European, and also some of the locations you were very familiar with as
Well,
well.
when it's the same thing that happened in Hitman's Wife's Bodyguard when we were watching too, going, oh, I recognize that place. And then because, I haven't spent that much time there, but like the couple times Nevis and I've been there, I can just kind of spot it. Or I go, that looks a lot like Croatian. I know like a lot of Italy can look like that too, and different things, but it was just kind of fun to point that out. But yeah, I don't have like a ton to say other than like, I think if you're a Nick Cage fan, you'll get a lot of enjoyment out of this movie, and I think you'll have a lot of fun with it. And if you're not, I still think it is a pretty enjoyable, like, just buddy action comedy. It's like that it's that perfect mid-range, mid-budget kind of like, yeah, that was pretty good. And then that's the extent of my criticism, really.
Right. I think the last act is the weakest aspect of the film, just in terms of it becoming more of an action
Yeah.
movie in sort of like art imitating life in a
Yeah.
weird way, and I
The way
don't think
them
that they're
writing the
able to
script and it kind of is
to
becoming
pull
that.
that off. But I do agree with you with like I like the stuff between him and Pedro Pascal, who is playing this arms dealer Javi, and their kind of friendship and this genuine like meeting your hero type moment is as surreal as you would kind of think meeting Nick Cage would be. I even really like the moments at the beginning of this film where Nick Cage, is having a lunch with David Gordon
Yeah.
Green, who he worked with in Joe, and talking about a role and trying to convince him for the part. And
Let
it's
me
just
read for you.
interesting.
Let me read for you.
It's just, again, it's interesting just seeing having that moment, because in that VOD stage, there are a couple of movies where you go to and say okay, these are the exceptions of the rule in Nicolas Cage's, more recent trajectory, obviously Pig being at the tail end of that, but also with, Joe and Color Out of Space and Mandy and movies like that. It's okay, in this prolific span of 10 to 15 years, those movies have kind of connected in some way or another, and they've harnessed that raw Cage energy and both allowed him to kind of be as absurd or as big as he wanted to be, or in the case of Pig, very intimate and small, but also kind of gave those filmmakers or the productions a little bit more cachet, because you have this big movie star who's not phoning it in. Obviously, we heard recently that Bruce Willis is quitting acting or retiring from acting because of a disorder that he's having problems with his memory, and that is sad. But you watch those movies and you realize that whether or not he was being forced to make those films without
Yeah.
truly any consent, he's not engaged by the material whatsoever. Where when you watch one of those Nick Cage films, like Arsenal or something like that,
He's given 100% for sure.
he's there. He's completely lucid in the scenes that he's in, and he loves acting. I think that that's the thing that I also really love again about this movie, is that his love for the art form is completely upfront, and he has always talked about
how
loving
much he loves
acting.
moves and movies, right?
Yeah, and I mean, obviously there's a joke in here with Paddington 2 and the Cabinet of Dr. Caligari.
Yeah.
and those are great, but I just love the sincerity that Nick Cage, the thing that keeps him going, or the thing that he's still in love with, is the art of acting. And there's no other guy out there right now working that is kind of in that zone, that is willing to do anything and everything, and is not above anything, and at the same time continues just to love it, decade after decade. And that is kind of infectious, in the same way that someone like Steven Soderbergh is just one of those guys that always needs to make movies. He can't not be working on something. He always has to work. And Nick Cage has that similar kind of I love what I do. I've always loved what I've done. This isn't something I just got into because, it was a family thing or something like that. And he's always kind of had to make that very clear. And again, he's made a lot of crap.
Sure. But
Wind Talkers, Captain Carly's Mandolin. I mean, there's a
ton
of,
you can make a whole
but when
film
he's
festival
great,
of them.
He's
great.
amazing. I'm sure we could do even a top 5 or 6 films where it's I think of his first truly amazing performance in the Coen Brothers Raising Arizona, and thinking where he went from that.
He's legitimately great. And then to your point, I think that even strengthens the emotional core of the movie. There's all that stuff with his family, which is that kind of cliched kind of, oh, my daughter's in danger, or my family's now involved in this kind of thing. But it's him wrestling with his career too. And that's that kind of meta stuff that I think works in the movie, because they bring that into it of he's struggling to get roles. He still really loves to act, but the only offer that's coming onto his table is $1 million deal for a birthday party. And I kind of like him wrestling with, oh, I'm going to retire because I'm not getting the roles that I want anymore. It's just not there. And then him finding his love for acting and film again by meeting this guy who paid him to be at his birthday party, and he has to, not save the world, but save his family and save the other guy's ass and stuff like that. And becomes
also there's a kidnapping plot as well within
with
this, that is about a
politician
daughter. Yeah. And so some of that is, I mean, that is going to the kind of more zany, outlandish kind of vibe overall. And I do think the other thing as well, if you are a true Nick Cage aficionado, which there are, you mentioned it with the Pocket in Toronto, but there are a lot of people that are very much, devotees of the teachings of Nick Cage.
Yeah.
If you are aware of his career both on and off screen, like I think some of the family stuff, even though it's not badly acted or, I mean, you mentioned it kind of being cliched, like just in terms of how it's written, but it is kind of one of the things that takes you out of the meta quality because if
of
you're
like Lily Sheen and or
well even like
or
again,
his
like if you
actual
go
family.
back if you go back and like again like at the Oscars when he won for Leaving Las Vegas, he was still married at that point to Patricia Arquette, and he thanks her, and like if you know that kind of stuff, it kind of breaks the fourth wall a little bit, and like again,
but
like
remember, this is a
relationship-wise-
fictional version of
No,
him,
I know,
right?
I know, but it's almost like Space Jam, A New Legacy as well, where it's like, okay, we want to have, you know, a fictionalized or heightened version of you know, a known superstar or celebrity of some kind, and then we're also going to put in kind of like that faux family dynamic, and I think that that's the one thing that doesn't really work here, just because it kind of feels like it is breaking the illusion of what they're creating. Like they can reference the family, maybe have one of his daughters, because like again, like if you look on like his biography, one of his kids is like 31, 32. He's having another kid right now with a woman who's like
27.
Yeah. He's been married multiple times,
like
and
5
like
times,
again, yeah, and so like some of that illusion, like I understand like maybe you don't want to go that personal and he wants to keep some of that separate, but I think
he's okay poking fun at himself and playing a fictionalized version of himself, and then kind of taking those cliches of what your, you know, a typical actor family is, and kind of maybe taking certain elements from those different marriages and maybe from his 2 children and things like that, and putting them in this. But I agree with you that if you know enough about him, that is the one thing, and especially how they get involved in the plot in the last act and stuff like that,
because it is more of a plot device than anything
totally
else.
That's
right?
what I
like
mean,
to keep him kind of, you know, in this compound and working, you know, alongside the CIA, and also trying to figure out if Javi is you know, this horrible person, and like with that, like it just kind of feels like that is the most
there
kind of
for that
written aspect or the raw aspect of it all.
And that's why I think the career stuff, which you brought up, is more interesting to me, of him going to the superfan's house, seeing all the stuff he has and using the golden guns.
And well, like, even the wax figure of the face off Nick Cage is funny because like there's that one,
there's a pillow
wax
in
museum
his thing.
in Niagara Falls that has like the John
Madame
Travolta
Tussauds,
version of that. And it's just like, it's horrifying.
The one thing I weirdly did like, which is that more kind of you know, could have gone either way, is Nicky Cage, the younger version of himself that he sees throughout the movie and talks to. So throughout the movie, Nick Cage sees a version of himself from probably that era you're talking about.
That's when he was doing the press tour for Wild at Heart. There's an interview with him on a British talk show where he literally comes out on the stage and does like a cartwheel, and it looked like he was on cocaine.
I remember, and I'm sure he was, but like in the movie, that version of him like speaks to him in his mind, and I kind of dug all that, like the de-aging and like just the going. That's when he does go full Cage, because it's Nicky Cage inside his mind, and they kind of let him.
Kim Coppola is what he's credited as. Is that?
Oh, is it? Okay, amazing. So I actually did like those moments, and they are out there, and there's like I think it added kind of an, I don't know, it definitely didn't need to be there, and it felt kind of off with the rest of the movie, but it's used sparingly enough. But when it does, I actually kind of thought it was weird enough, and that I just kind of vibed with Nick Cage talking to a younger, wilder version of himself. I had fun with that too.
Yeah, it's just interesting to see like where he was, like at that point in his life, and now where he is, and you know, being nearly 60, and like again, the eccentricity is still there, the wildness of Cage is there, and the willingness to kind of be completely, you know, willing to go to the farthest reaches possible for a role are all there. But it is fascinating to see. Again, this is an actor who has had such a fascinating career with the highs and lows, and again, it kind of feels like he's been like a part of every aspect of the industry in some way
Yeah.
or another. Like he's seen it all, and like he's still going, and he's still weirdly reinventing himself. Like I feel like we're coming to the next stage of Cage,
I
and
think
with
with
that,
Pig and this, like, I feel
yeah,
like
and with Renfield coming up, like I feel like, okay, like, you know, he's paid his debts, he's done a lot of these kind of more humbling smaller movies, and you know, still kind of perfected and played with the art of acting as he sees it, and kind of, you know, kept, you know, a hand in there. But now he's kind of coming out of it, and we're seeing, you know, like him with this, you know, Universal movie that he's going to be playing Dracula, and he's already talked about like having like, you know, Malignant be an inspiration, and Gabriel, that character, the way he moves,
incredible.
which is, yeah, it's awesome. Like and like and Nick Cage like talking about how like he's a true goth and all this kind of stuff is like it's fun. So I think we're in this new stage of Nick Cage of a
The stages
reevaluation
of
or
Cage, yes.
yeah, an appreciation of him again, where like he'll find his way into, you know, there are rumors of him going to be in Francis Ford Coppola's Megapolis. Whether or not that happens, I mean, it'll still be interesting to see like what indie filmmaker or other filmmaker wants to use him again, because in the last, you know, 10 or 15 years or so, we haven't seen a lot of him kind of working with bigger name filmmakers. I think the last kind of big name director he worked with over like the last maybe 8 years was Oliver Stone and Snowden, or I mean David Gordon Green as well, and Joe, but Joe's a very
Small
small
movie.
little
Yeah.
movie, and it's a great film, and it's a very good performance from him. But yeah, I just feel like we're on to this next stage, and this is kind of like the marking of the beginning of that. So
Yeah, I love that. I had a lot of fun with the movie. I'm gonna give it a 3.5 out of 5. Like I again, I don't think it ever crosses that line to be truly great, but I think whether you're a Cage fan or you just kind of like action comedies, I think you'll have a relatively good time. So 3.5 for me.
yeah, I mean, I'm just gonna give it a 3 out of 5, but I still enjoyed it for what it was. It's just like it's one of those movies where like the more time I've gone off of it, it's just that it's kind of disappeared a little bit. But
Totally. I
the
don't disagree with
appreciation
that.
of Nick Cage is
I
still
think that's
very
what
much there.
bumps it for me.
I think that's why like we've spent this whole
Half hour.
conversation more talking about his career and the fascination of who Nick Cage was and is and what he's doing. And I think he's one of the most fascinating actors working. Like again, like the guy, you know, went from art house movie to blockbuster star in Jerry Bruckheimer Productions to VOD trash, and is now kind of at a place where he's in a new sort of art house sort of legacy that's coming up, and like a part
Love
of
it.
that is owed to him.
Good for him, man. He can do whatever he wants, really. So God bless Nicolas Cage. Thank you all for listening or watching. We really, really do appreciate it. We have other reviews like Sonic the Hedgehog and other things. We've been off for a little while, but we have a new draft which you guys can check out, the 121st draft. We have reviews for Sonic the Hedgehog, like I mentioned, Apollo 10 and a half, A Space Age Childhood, The Bubble, Morbius, a lot more, so go check those out, and also a review of Robert Eggers' The Northman, so go check that out as well. We haven't done this in so long that I almost forget my intro. You can one-stop shop for everything over on Letterboxd over at Untitled_movies. If you just want the one place where you can get everything, that's probably your easiest spot. And as always, my name is Matt Rohrbeck. You can find more of my work around the internet, but mostly at UntitledMoviePodcast.com. And you can follow me on all the social medias at Matt Rohrbeck.
And I'm Eric Marchin. You can find more of my video reviews on rogerstv.com/cinemascene and on the social medias at EM6211.
Until next time.
Nick Cage gives good smooches.
That's high praise.